At 2:17 a.m. on the 3rd of June, 1983, Andrea Wills, 26, a paramedic with East Palms Medical Response, received what would become her final dispatch. The report was brief. Unresponsive male, possible cardiac arrest, Buckthorn Road, lot 17, no callback number, no caller ID, just coordinates and a location. Andrea was in the passenger seat of Unit 4, a 1978 Dodge ambulance. Her partner, David Lance, 32, was driving. The two had been working together for nearly 6 months. Shift had been quiet 2 calls earlier in the night, both minor. This one sounded routine. They left Route 12 and followed a narrow dirt road southeast. It wasn't listed on their primary coverage map. Buckthorn Road was barely maintained and hadn't been used in any prior call logs. Still, Andrea confirmed they'd take it. At 2:31 a.m., they reached lot 17. The property was dark, quiet, overgrown. A single porch light flickered above a rusted trailer. No movement, no noise. The mailbox bore a faded, spray-painted number 17. Andrea keyed the radio. Unit 4 on scene, Buckthorn 17, going on foot. She took her trauma bag and flashlight and exited the vehicle. David stayed behind in the cab. He watched her approach the porch. That was the last time anyone saw her. 2 minutes passed, then 5. David exited the vehicle and called her name. No answer. He circled the trailer. The front door was ajar. Inside, one bare mattress, empty shelves, no person, no patient, no sign of Andrea. He called dispatch at 2:39 a.m. Lost contact with partner. Possible missing responder. Request backup. Deputies arrived at 2:57 a.m. The area was cordoned off and searched until daylight. No footprints, other than Andrea's ply. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no belongings except her radio and personal phone, still inside the ambulance. Her stethoscope was hanging behind the seat. The trailer was registered to FS Holdings LLC, an inactive shell corporation based in Delaware. Property taxes hadn't been paid in 2 years. Andrea Wills was declared missing in the line of duty. No evidence, no suspects, no remains. Case status, inactive. 20 years later, on the 4th of August, 2003, a construction crew working south of Wellspring began draining a large portion of Cypress Hollow Swamp for a new canal project. It was part of a state-funded infrastructure update, meant to reroute water flow and reduce flooding. No one expected to find anything until the second day of dredging. At approximately 10:42 a.m., the bucket of a Komatsu excavator snagged on something metallic beneath the mud. The operator, Alan Ruiz, initially assumed it was old piping or part of a wrecked boat. But when they cleared the area around it, they saw the crushed front end of a vehicle. What emerged was a rusted, skeletal frame of an ambulance. Its grille, barely visible, still carried the faded blue letters, EPMR Unit 4. The sheriff's office was notified immediately. Lieutenant Garrett Bailey was first on scene. He'd served in Wellspring since the early 80s. He'd also been one of the responding deputies the night Andrea Wills disappeared. When he saw the wreckage, he didn't need confirmation. He recognized it instantly. The ambulance had been submerged in 6 feet of swamp, water, and mud for 2 decades. The body was badly degraded, roof collapsed, windows shattered, doors half gone from rust, but the VIN plate was intact. Inside, they found what remained of the cabin: shattered plastic, mold, rot. The passenger side seat was completely gone. The driver's seat frame was still bolted to the floor. And in the rear medical bay, investigators recovered 3 things: a decomposed medical bag with rusted instruments, a bloodstained cloth pressed into the cabinet hinge, a metal pendant, small, shaped like an anatomical heart, not standard issue. There were no bones, no human remains, no ID, but one thing was clear. Andrea's ambulance had not disappeared into thin air. It had been sunk. The location raised more questions. Buckthorn Road, where she was last seen, was 6 miles east of the swamp. There was no direct access road. The swamp wasn't even listed on any of the original 1,983 search maps, meaning someone moved the vehicle after she vanished and intentionally put it where no one would ever find it. Until now, Bailey stood next to the wreck, silent. 20 years. He thought he'd buried the case, but seeing the vehicle dragged from the water changed everything. He made the call himself, reopened the Wills case immediately, and this time, he wouldn't let it go cold. The ambulance was moved to a secure hangar at the Wellspring Sheriff's impound yard. A joint forensic team from the State Medical Examiner's Office and FDLE arrived the next morning. Despite the heavy degradation, they were able to begin initial analysis within 24 hours. Lieutenant Garrett Bailey watched from behind the observation tape as they combed through the wreck. Cameras clicked. Gloved hands handled the pendant with tweezers. The rear cabinet was pried open, revealing more fragments, a few strands of hair, rust-covered bandage scissors, and an empty morphine ampule fused to the metal by age and pressure. A lab tech held up the pendant in a plastic evidence bag. Definitely not department issue. Medical maybe. Too detailed for costume jewelry. The back left corner of the interior held the most concerning discovery. A concentrated area of dried blood, protected by a collapsed cabinet that had somehow shielded it from complete washout. Samples were taken. Preliminary tests showed it was human female. Bailey didn't wait. He left the impound yard and drove straight to the home of Catherine Wills, Andrea's mother. She answered the door slowly. Her hair was silver now, her face thinner, but her voice was the same. "Garrett," she said, "I knew you'd come." He stepped inside. The house hadn't changed. The living room still held a framed photo of Andrea in her EMS uniform, smiling, a stethoscope around her neck. "We found it," he said. Her eyes didn't blink. "The ambulance?" He nodded. "Yesterday morning, in Cypress Hollow, submerged. It's been there since 1983. Catherine sat without a word. After a moment, she reached into a box on the coffee table and slid it toward him. "You might want to see this." Inside were old newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, photocopies of missing persons, flyers, a personal archive. She flipped to a page marked in red pen. Anonymous letter number the 2nd of November, 1984. It read, "She didn't run. She didn't drown. She saw something. That's why they took her." Bailey frowned. "You never showed us this." "You never asked," Catherine said. "After a year passed, nobody came anymore. I got 3 of these over the years, all unsigned, all typed." He read it again. It wasn't just the message, it was what it implied. A cover-up, not an accident. A motive that no one had looked into. That afternoon, Bailey returned to the sheriff's department and ordered the original case file pulled from archive storage. When the clerk wheeled it in, it was thin, disturbingly thin. 15 pages total, 3 photos, 1 field report, and only 1 witness statement. From David Lance, her partner. Bailey opened it. Subject exited vehicle to approach trailer. Last visual contact approximately 2:34 a.m. Subject failed to return. Area searched. No visual. No distress. Call heard. Nothing about hearing a struggle. Nothing about movement. No mention of where he was during the crucial 5 minutes. And no follow-up interview. Bailey stared at the page. Something was off. He grabbed the phone and dialed an internal line. "Get me David Lance's last known address." The voice on the other end paused. "You're reopening that?" Bailey didn't answer. He just hung up. It had been 20 years, but if David Lance was still alive, he had questions to answer. David Lance was still in Florida. According to DMV records, he lived 2 counties over in a modest duplex in Homosassa. No criminal record, no recent employment history. Listed as disabled. Age 52. Garrett Bailey made the drive himself the next morning. The house was run down but quiet. An American flag hung from a rusted bracket. Lawn unkempt. No car in the driveway. He knocked once, no response. Knocked again, louder. Footsteps. The door opened an inch, chained. A man's face peered out, pale, unshaven, eyes sunken. Bailey recognized him instantly. "David," he said. A long pause. "I figured you'd show up," Lance muttered. "After the news." Bailey held up his badge. "We found the ambulance." Another pause. Then the chain unlatched. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and cigarette smoke. The blinds were drawn. A small fan buzzed in the corner. Lance shuffled toward the kitchen without looking back. "You're here to reopen it, aren't you?" he said. "Yes." Lance poured tap water into a cracked glass, drank, then sat at the edge of his couch. "It's been 20 years, Lieutenant. You ever wonder why nobody came knocking sooner?" "I'm here now," Bailey said, "and I have questions. Ones I should have asked in 1983. Lance laughed under his breath. "Yeah, you should have." Bailey pulled out a copy of the original statement and dropped it on the table. "This is all you gave us. 5 lines. No detail, no follow-up." "Because I was told not to," Lance said flatly. Bailey sat. "By who?" "Dispatch, supervisor, everyone. The next morning I was pulled aside and told to leave it alone. That Andrea had likely run off. That there was no evidence of foul play. They said if I made it complicated, I'd be off the job." Bailey narrowed his eyes. "And you accepted that?" Lance stared at him. "I was 29, broke, had a kid on the way. They told me I'd lose my pension. Andrea deserved more." "She did," Lance said. His voice cracked. Bailey leaned in. "You were there. You were the last person to see her. Tell me everything, now." Lance exhaled. "She got out to check the trailer. Said to wait in the vehicle. I did. But a minute later, I saw movement behind the trailer. Like shadows, people, maybe 2 or 3. I stepped out and started toward her when I heard her yell, but not a scream. More like, 'No!' and then silence." Bailey didn't interrupt. "I ran around the trailer, but she was gone. I swear, Garrett, no sign of her. But I saw tire tracks behind the property. A wide vehicle, maybe a van. But when the deputies came, they didn't document any of it. Just taped off the front porch and left." "Why didn't you insist on reporting it?" "I tried. I was told to shut up." Bailey leaned back, jaw tight. "Who told you that, David?" Lance hesitated, then answered. "Supervisor Harold Decker said it came from higher up, that this wasn't something we were meant to touch." Bailey froze. Decker had been sheriff in '83, retired in '92, still lived in the area. "He told you to stay quiet? And to sign the report they wrote for me?" Bailey stood. "I'll need a sworn statement." "I'll give it." "One more thing," Bailey said. He reached into a folder and pulled out a photo the pendant found in the ambulance. "You ever seen this?" Lance looked down, and something in his face changed. Color drained. "Yes," he said quietly. "She wore that the night she disappeared." Bailey stared at him. "She told me someone had left it on her locker the day before. No note. She thought it was a prank." "But it wasn't?" Lance looked up. "No," he said. "It wasn't a prank." Bailey left the house with one thing on his mind. If someone left Andrea a message before she disappeared and that pendant ended up in her ambulance, then this wasn't just a disappearance. It was a warning, and someone had made sure it stayed buried for 20 years. After leaving David Lance's house, Lieutenant Garrett Bailey didn't return to the station. He drove west past the edge of Homosassa, out where the highways faded into 2-lane blacktop, then gravel. He needed time to think. The conversation with Lance had confirmed what he already suspected. Andrea Wills hadn't vanished. She'd been silenced. And someone, maybe several people, had helped cover it up. When he returned to the Wellspring Sheriff's Department later that afternoon, he went straight to records and requested every archived personnel file for East Palm's medical response. The service had been privately contracted in the late 70s to handle overflow for rural emergencies. It had shut down in 1984, just 1 year after Andrea disappeared. The files were thin, too thin. Only 4 employees were listed as full-time medical staff. Andrea Wills, David Lance, a supervisor named Hal Decker, and a fourth name Garrett didn't recognize, Miles Rourke, medical director. There was no photo of Rourke, no resume, just a mailing address that led to a P.O. box in Clearwater and a cancellation notice from the Department of Health dated July 1984. Medical license suspended pending investigation. There was no further documentation, no charges filed, no public record of any investigation. Garrett flagged the page and moved on. In the dispatch logs from June 1983, he noticed something else. The original call to Buckthorn Lot 17 hadn't come through standard channels. It had been manually logged into the system by the overnight dispatcher, with a small handwritten note beside it. Private referral from clinic line 1:57 a.m. Clinic line. That would have been Clearwater Surgical, the private outpatient facility that East Palms occasionally transferred patients to. A facility that, according to tax records, was partially owned at the time by Hal Decker. It was the first real connection on paper. Bailey pushed the stack aside and called in Detective Maggie Reyes, recently transferred from Broward. She was sharp, detail-obsessed, and didn't carry the old loyalties many of the local deputies still held. He briefed her quickly, showed her the documents, and handed her a name. Miles Rourke. See if he's alive. See if he's talking. Then he took a separate path. Bailey returned to the impound yard alone. The ambulance was still there, parked beneath a large tarp in Bay 2. The stench of rust and decay filled the air inside. Forensics had finished collecting samples, but the wreck hadn't been moved. He climbed into the back, flashlight in hand. Most of the cabinets had collapsed, warped from water and time. The stretcher mount was still bolted to the floor, though the gurney itself was gone. Near the rear wall, tucked behind a steel oxygen bracket, he found something the team had missed. A scrap of paper, folded and stuck to the inner wall with decayed adhesive. It was blank on one side. On the back, faint pencil lines. 2 words, smeared but readable. Don't trust. The rest was gone. Illegible. Waterlogged. But it was written in quick, slanted handwriting, rushed, almost panicked. Bailey took a photo of it, then bagged it himself. Back at his desk, he stared at the board they'd started to rebuild timelines. Photos, notes. Andrea had received a call that never should have come through. She was sent to a property that didn't exist on any official EMS route. She vanished without a trace. Her ambulance was found 6 miles from the scene, intentionally dumped. Blood confirmed inside. Personal effects untouched. And now, evidence that someone, likely Andrea herself, had tried to leave a final message. He marked a page in red ink and underlined it once. Somebody inside knew. By the time Detective Maggie Reyes returned to the station that evening, she had a manila folder tucked under her arm and a look on her face that Bailey hadn't seen from her before, part disbelief, part something colder. "I found him," she said. Miles Rourke. After East Palm's medical response shut down in 1984, he'd moved out of state. New name, new license. Reinstated under his full birth name, Michael Rourke Milson, in Texas. Worked for a chain of pain management clinics for nearly 2 decades. Quietly retired in 2002. Last known address, Corpus Christi. No open warrants, no charges, no lawsuits on file. He disappeared just enough to not be suspicious, Reyes said. But he's out there, he's real. Bailey stared at the photocopied ID in her file-grainy DMV photo. Early 60s, gray hair, gold-rimmed glasses. "That's the man Andrea worked under?" he asked. Same one. Bailey didn't respond right away. He was still thinking about the slip of paper from the ambulance. The last words scrawled inside. Don't trust who? Dispatch? The supervisor? Rourke? He asked Reyes to dig deeper into the Clearwater surgical connection. If the night call originated from their clinic line, there had to be records or someone who remembered. Even if the building was gone, someone would know who ran the place in 1983. Meanwhile, Bailey returned to the original case files one more time and found something that hadn't made sense 20 years ago, but now looked different. A property report for Buckthorn Lot 17, filed 3 days after Andrea disappeared. It noted the trailer as vacant, with no electricity and no utility records going back 6 months, meaning no one had been living there. No patient, no emergency, nothing. Bailey circled the line and scribbled a note. False call, stage location. Someone had lured Andrea there and used the trailer as bait. He called Catherine Wills again the next morning and asked to revisit her home. She had told him there were more things. Old letters, scraps of notes, things she hadn't turned over back in the day because no one had bothered to ask. She brought him to a box in the back of the hall closet, a small file container, labeled Andrea Personal. Inside were old journals, letters, scraps of folded paper, photographs. One envelope was dated May 29th, 1,983 5 days before Andrea vanished. It was addressed in handwriting, no return address. Inside was a single torn page from a medical magazine with a note scribbled across it in blue ink. Some patients aren't on the chart. Ask the clinic. That was all. No name, no signature, no context. But it had been mailed directly to her home, not the station, not the EMS office, her home. Whoever sent it had known her address. Bailey took the envelope, the paper, and photographed both. He thanked Catherine, then returned to the station and opened the only folder he hadn't touched yet, the employment record of Hal Decker. Decker had been the EMS supervisor in 1983. He'd signed off on Andrea's final shifts. He'd also been one of the first on scene the night she disappeared. There was one strange detail. The dispatch tapes from that night, the original reels, were signed out by him in 1984 and never returned. No one had noticed. Bailey highlighted the entry. Then he made 2 calls. First, to the Texas State Medical Board to begin the formal process of requesting testimony from Miles Rourke. Second, to a man Bailey hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Harold Decker, retired, living less than 30 miles away. It was time to knock on the door. Harold Decker lived in a gated community just outside Palmetto, Florida. It was the kind of place with manicured lawns, pastel siding, and silence the kind that made you forget who people used to be. Garrett Bailey pulled up just after noon. He didn't call ahead. He didn't want to give Decker time to prepare, or worse, disappear. The door opened before he could knock. Decker was already standing there, leaning on a cane, white hair trimmed neatly. He looked older, smaller, but his eyes were sharp. "You came about Andrea," he said. Bailey didn't reply. Decker stepped back and motioned him in. The interior of the home was spotless. Air conditioning hummed steadily. On the mantle, a photo of Decker from 1980. One in his full EMS uniform, arm around a much younger paramedic, Andrea Wills. Bailey stared at it for a long moment before speaking. "We found the ambulance. In the swamp." Decker nodded once. "I heard. I knew it would turn up. I just didn't think I'd still be alive when it did." "You were the last to access the dispatch tapes," Bailey said, cutting straight to it. "You checked them out in '84. They were never returned. Why?" Decker didn't answer right away. He limped to the kitchen, poured a glass of water with shaky hands, and returned to his recliner. "I listened to them," he said. "Every second. What I heard scared the hell out of me." Bailey sat. There was no cardiac arrest call, no medical emergency. That call was planted. It came from a private line not routed through county. There was a pause right before the line cut. Then Andrea says something. I only heard it once. She said, "This isn't a patient. He's not sick. He's bleeding already." Then static. Then nothing. Bailey's jaw clenched. "You could have come forward." "I tried. I told my supervisor. He told me to burn the tapes. Said I'd be fired, sued for obstruction, maybe worse. He said it came from up the chain people who paid our bills. Clearwater Surgical was laundering through East Palms. They were moving unregistered patients unconscious, sometimes sedated. We didn't ask questions because we weren't told to. Why didn't you warn her? Decker stared down at his hands. She got too close. She asked questions. The week before she disappeared, she told me something was off. Said she got a weird call from someone who used to work at Clearwater. Told her not all their patients were there voluntarily. Told her some didn't come out. You believed her? I did, he said, but I was a coward. Bailey leaned forward. So who called her out that night? Who routed the fake dispatch? Decker's answer was quiet, but immediate. Rourke. Bailey froze. He was the one who handled after-hours calls for special transfers. He'd log them into the clinic's system and flag our drivers. Andrea wasn't supposed to get that call. I think it was meant for someone else, but once she got it, they ran with it. Used the trailer to intercept her, she walked in, and that was it. Bailey stood. You're gonna give a statement. Decker nodded slowly. I'll do it. I've been waiting to uncarry this for 20 years. As Bailey left, Decker called out after him. One more thing, he said. The pendant you found in the ambulance, the anatomical heart. Bailey turned. That's not jewelry, Decker said. That's a badge. It's the emblem for Caduceus Unit 7 Private Surgical Corps. Offshore transplant specialists. They operated out of Clearwater for 3 years before disappearing. Why would she have that? She wouldn't, Decker said, unless someone gave it to her, or she pulled it off someone during a fight. Bailey drove back in silence. The pieces were lining up. A fake dispatch, a defunct clinic, a private surgical team, and a dead paramedic who never got to finish her shift. And now, a witness willing to speak. It wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was conspiracy. And someone was going to pay. Back at the station, Bailey wasted no time. He typed up Decker's sworn statement himself, reviewed it twice, then had it notarized and placed under evidence seal. For the first time in 2 decades, the case file on Andrea Wills wasn't just a loose collection of dead ends. Now, it had a timeline and a name. Detective Reyes was already at her desk when Bailey returned. She looked up from her computer, eyes alert. I found someone, she said. Ex-employee from Clearwater Surgical. Worked admin, billing department. Name's Eliza Trent. Quit in early 1984. No public interviews, no complaints, no lawsuit. But she turned her screen. She filed an internal report. Handwritten. It never went public. It was scanned into the county's contract termination file when Clearwater lost their medical license. Bailey leaned in. It was a 1-page memo dated February 1984. I do not feel comfortable continuing my employment under these conditions. On several occasions, I've been asked to delete patient records that do not match incoming billing. I've seen unidentified individuals brought in at night with no paperwork and no attending physician present. These patients were always sedated. We were told to log them as anonymous ER overflow. I don't believe that's the truth. It was signed and initialed. That's a witness, Bailey said. She's living in Sarasota, Reyes replied. Still working in private care. Quiet life. I already called. She agreed to talk on record. They drove down the same afternoon. Eliza Trent lived in a modest townhouse near a quiet cul-de-sac. Early 60s, soft-spoken, polite. But the moment they mentioned Andrea Wills, her entire posture changed. I didn't think anyone would ever ask about her, she said. Bailey and Reyes sat with her in the kitchen. She had the original of her memo still folded in a manila envelope and placed it on the table without a word. I was afraid back then, she said. Clearwater had friends, police, judges. My supervisor warned me to keep things simple, but I knew what I saw. She recounted the same details. Late night arrivals, unconscious patients, no records. Once, she caught a glimpse of a chart the heading said, CU7. She asked about it. It's a transfer code, her boss told her. They're international patients, prepped for specialty surgery. But none of them ever left through the front door. Eliza took a deep breath. One night, in May, I saw a young woman in uniform, arguing with Miles Rourke in the East hallway. I only caught part of it, but she said, "This is illegal." You can't just move people like this. Rourke told her to walk away. She said she was going to report it. He got real quiet. Then he said, "Then you'd better be ready for the consequences." "Was it Andrea Wills?" Bailey asked. Elisa nodded. "I didn't know her name then, but when I saw the missing persons flyers, I knew." Bailey leaned forward. "Do you remember anything else? Anything unusual before the clinic shut down?" Elisa hesitated. 2 weeks before the license was pulled, Rourke moved a bunch of files out. After hours, I saw him loading boxes into a van, white, unmarked, no plates. It looked like they were clearing house, like they knew the end was coming. She looked directly at Bailey. "You want the truth?" Rourke was never scared of the law. He was scared of the people funding him. Offshore money, transplants, black market coordination. That clinic was just a shell. Bailey closed his notebook. "Would you testify to all of this?" Elisa didn't blink. "I'll testify. I've waited 20 years for someone to take this seriously." They left Sarasota at sundown. 2 witnesses, a confirmed cover-up, a medical badge connected to a now defunct offshore transplant ring, and one man who'd been at the center of it all, Miles Rourke. By the morning of the 9th of August, the case file on Andrea Wills had expanded from a forgotten envelope in archives to a full-scale criminal investigation. Bailey and Reyes now had a working theory, one that pointed to deliberate targeting, falsified records, and a system designed to disappear people. At the top of the board, Miles Rourke. His medical license history showed multiple disciplinary actions. 2 in Texas, 1 sealed case from 1985 in Florida. No convictions, no trial, no accountability. Bailey called the Texas Medical Review Board and pushed for access to the sealed records. The clerk on the phone was polite, but firm. "Those documents are restricted under state privacy statute." "So you're telling me a doctor with multiple infractions, last connected to a facility, now implicated in black market transplants, is being protected?" Silence. "Then, we'll escalate your request. You'll need to submit a formal inquiry to the state board's attorney." Bailey hung up. Typical. The system that had failed Andrea once was still standing between her and justice. Reyes had already anticipated the roadblock. She'd filed a subpoena for Rourke's personal and professional records. In the meantime, she pulled traffic camera data, license plate logs, and real estate holdings. Within hours, they had a new address. Corpus Christi, Texas. A small property near the bay registered under a shell LLC, not unlike the one that owned the trailer Andrea was sent to in 1983. Bailey didn't wait for authorization. They booked 2 flights, packed evidence files, and by sunset, they were on a plane headed west. The next day, they landed in Corpus at 9:14 a.m. Rourke's property was 20 minutes from the airport, a 1-story concrete structure with storm shutters, 2 dead vehicles in the driveway, and no sign of life. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. Reyes motioned to the side yard, where a locked gate led to the back. She climbed over and found a broken security light, a discarded IV stand, and what looked like burned paperwork near a barrel. Bailey called it in. Local sheriff's deputies arrived and confirmed what Reyes suspected. Rourke wasn't home, but he had left in a hurry. Inside the house, officers found packed bags, a half-empty bottle of prescription opiates, a suitcase open on the bed, passports inside 1 US, 1 Dominican Republic, both in Rourke's name. He had been preparing to run, and they were close. What caught Reyes' attention most wasn't the passports. It was the framed newspaper on his wall, yellowed, sun-bleached, from 1984. The headline read, "Clearwater Surgical Shuts Down Amid Tax Probe." But someone had circled the subheading in red marker, "All patient records lost in office fire." Reyes snapped a photo of it. Then another of a small plaque beside it. A silver emblem, polished clean, Caduceus Unit 7. Same emblem as Andrea's pendant. Later that evening, Reyes pulled travel data and confirmed a hit. Miles Rourke had booked a flight to the Dominican Republic. Departure, tomorrow, 10:05 a.m. He hadn't left yet. Bailey got on the phone with the airline and then with US Marshals. 10 minutes later, they had confirmation. Ticket flagged, gate alert set. They'd be at the airport before sunrise. And if Rourke showed he wouldn't leave the country alive or free, at 6:15 a.m., Corpus Christi International Airport was quiet. A few travelers dragged carry-ons through the terminal. The usual shuffle of morning flights, half-asleep gate agents, and muted announcements. But Gate 12 was different. That's where Detective Maggie Reyes stood, coffee in hand, scanning every face in the security line. Bailey waited at the far end of the terminal, near baggage claim, phone to his ear. The US Marshals had given them a 15-minute window. If Rourke showed, they were to confirm his identity and hold him until federal officers arrived. He was not to be confronted unless he tried to flee. At 6:42 a.m., he appeared. Alone, clean-shaven, dressed in beige slacks and a gray windbreaker, carrying a small roller bag, calm, composed like a man going on vacation. He wore a baseball cap, pulled low, but it wasn't enough. Bailey recognized him immediately. Target confirmed, he said into the burner phone. Reyes was already moving. She approached casually, walking parallel, not making eye contact. Rourke placed his bag on the conveyor belt at TSA screening, removed his shoes, pulled out his laptop, then hesitated just slightly when the agent asked him to remove his jacket. That moment of hesitation was enough. A hand landed on his shoulder. Miles Rourke? He turned and froze. Reyes held up her badge. "Step aside, sir. We need to speak with you." He didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He just looked past her, at the gate, at the windows, at the boarding ramp that would never open for him again. By 7:15 a.m., he was in a holding room at the airport security office, cuffed, silent. Bailey entered first. He placed a folder on the table, Andrea's file, and opened it slowly. Photo, timeline, forensic photos from the ambulance. "This is Andrea Wills," he said. "You remember her?" Rourke didn't move. "You dispatched her to a false call on the 3rd of June, 1983. She never came back." Still nothing. Reyes leaned forward. "We've got your name on clinic records, 2 witness statements, the pendant, the emblem, a list of deleted patients tied to your facility. We've even got the statement from the woman you threatened in your hallway." Rourke looked down. Then, finally, he spoke. "You have no body." Bailey didn't blink. "We found her ambulance. We found her blood. We have a motive. We have the cover-up. And we're 1 day away from pulling the old satellite records that show your private clinic was running patients in and out with no paper trail." Rourke stayed quiet, but Bailey saw the shift in his face. Not fear, just calculation. "How many others?" Reyes asked. No response. Bailey closed the file. "You're going to rot for what you did. Not just for Andrea, but for everyone you erased along the way." They left him there. By noon, the marshals had full custody. Rourke was being extradited back to Florida under federal warrant: conspiracy, fraud, obstruction, and potential homicide pending identification. But Bailey knew that wasn't the end. Rourke had been a coordinator, but someone bigger had funded him, protected him, buried the clinic's paper trail, and made sure a dead paramedic stayed forgotten in a swamp for 20 years. This was just the first arrest, not the last. The arrest of Miles Rourke made headlines across Florida by nightfall. Former Clearwater surgeon apprehended in cold case investigation. 1,980. 3 paramedic disappearance reopened after ambulance. Recovered from swamp. But for Garrett Bailey, there was no victory lap, only more questions. Rourke hadn't said another word since the holding room. No lawyer yet, no request for bail. It felt calculated, controlled, like a man who knew exactly how far the evidence reached and where it didn't. Back in Wellspring, Bailey returned to the station and walked into the evidence room. He asked for one item: Andrea's pendant, the heart-shaped anatomical medallion. Still sealed in plastic, he examined it again. No inscriptions, no serial number. But the symbol in the center, the caduceus with the number 7 beneath it, was now a confirmed match to the logo found in Rourke's home. That emblem wasn't just decorative, it was a brand, an identifier. Reyes walked in as he held it under the desk lamp. "There's more," she said. She dropped a file on the table. It was thin, stamped confidential, archive transfer, 1,985. She'd found it while combing through the public records retention warehouse for any mislabeled files related to East Palms or Clearwater. Inside was a letter yellowed, water-stained, but legible. It was addressed to a state senator W. Hollings, dated the 2nd of October, 1984. The first sentence was chilling. "This is to confirm that as of this date, Caduceus Unit 7 will be ceasing all US-based operations until further notice in accordance with our offshore transition protocol." Bailey read the letter 3 times. Caduceus Unit 7 hadn't disappeared, they had relocated. At the bottom of the page was a signature: G. Trelane. No title, no contact info. "We ran the name," Reyes said. "Nothing in US licensure, no known address. But guess where the forwarding address on the envelope led?" Bailey didn't speak. San Pedro de Macorís, Dominican Republic. Same country Rourke was flying to. "They didn't just shut down," she continued. "They evolved, went international. And no one followed them. No law enforcement, no oversight. They just disappeared into bureaucracy." Bailey sat in silence. This wasn't just about Andrea anymore. Clearwater Surgical had been a front. Caduceus Unit 7 was the machine behind it, and they'd been operating in the open, protected by silence, connections, and the illusion of legality. He stood and looked at the whiteboard on the wall, at the timeline, at the names: Andrea Wills, David Lance, Hal Decker, Elisa Trent, Miles Rourke. Now, he added a new one: G. Trelane. Unknown affiliation, unknown status, unknown reach. Bailey turned to Reyes. "We need federal eyes on this." She nodded. "Already in motion. I flagged it to DOJ and Interpol. If they've got an operation running offshore, we're going to find it." But before they could move forward, there was still one thing left to do. They had found Andrea's ambulance. They had found her blood, but not her. They had evidence, but they didn't have her remains. And without that, it wasn't justice. It was just paperwork. 2 days after Rourke's arrest, the forensic report on Andrea Wills' ambulance came back from the state lab. The blood sample recovered from the rear cabinet, too degraded for standard testing, had been successfully sequenced using mitochondrial DNA. The match was confirmed against a swab provided by Andrea's mother. Positive identification. Blood belonged to Andrea Wills. Volume consistent with significant blood loss. It was enough to confirm violence, enough to justify the homicide designation, but not enough to determine cause of death or whether Andrea had died inside that ambulance or somewhere else. And still, no body. That night, Bailey sat alone in his office, staring at a map pinned to the corkboard. The region surrounding Cypress Hollow Swamp stretched for miles, much of it untouched, unmarked. County search records from 1983 had focused on the area surrounding Buckthorn Road, the trailer site. But no search had been conducted between that site and the swamp, because no one had realized the ambulance had been moved. Now they did. He pulled a ruler from his desk drawer and laid it between the 2 coordinates, Lot 17 and the site of the ambulance recovery. It wasn't a straight line, but it passed through a stretch of old fire roads, overgrown and unused since the 70s. At the midpoint, a narrow patch of land listed on county survey maps as Parcel 28C, unincorporated reserve. No structures, no history of permits, no owner on record. The next morning, Bailey and Reyes were there at first light. Thick undergrowth, waist-high grass, and moss-draped pines surrounded the clearing. The road hadn't seen a tire in decades, but the land felt wrong, too flat, too untouched. And near the center of the parcel, something stood out, a rectangular depression in the soil, roughly 6 by 3 feet. Reyes crouched beside it. "You see that?" she said, brushing back pine needles and loose soil. The outline was too precise to be natural. They called in forensics. By noon, the dig had started. 2 feet down, the smell changed. At 3 feet, the shovel struck something hard. At 4 feet, the first bone appeared. The grave was shallow, hasty, poorly sealed, but the remains had stayed intact thanks to the dense clay soil. A femur, a fragment of rib, a torn scrap of uniform fabric, blue-gray, still bearing a single faded patch. East Palm's medical response. And then tucked beneath the pelvis, something metallic. Bailey pulled on gloves and lifted it carefully. A name tag. Bent, rusted, but still legible. Wills. He didn't speak. No one did. A few feet away, Reyes radioed the county coroner. Confirmed body recovery. Unmarked grave. Remains believed to be Andrea Wills. That evening, Bailey returned to Catherine Wills' house. He sat with her on the porch and told her what they'd found. She didn't cry. She just nodded, folded her hands in her lap, and whispered. She didn't run. I knew she didn't run. Andrea Wills had finally been found. Not a memory, not a file, not a theory. She was real again. And now, they could fight for her. The discovery of Andrea Wills' body changed everything. What had been a reopened cold case was now classified as an active homicide investigation. The remains were positively identified within 24 hours through dental records and mitochondrial DNA. Time of death, consistent with the night of her disappearance. Cause, undetermined, but trauma was evident on multiple bones, specifically 2 fractured ribs and a depressed cranial injury likely caused by blunt force. The crime was no longer theoretical. It was official, documented, real, and the walls around those who had buried it were beginning to collapse. With the remains recovered and secured, Bailey shifted his focus back to the network. Caduceus Unit 7 was no longer just a logo on a pendant, it was the connective tissue behind everything. The fake patient transfers, the undocumented clinic activity, the offshore relocation, the erased records, and now, possibly, Andrea's murder. The DOJ task force confirmed receipt of Reyes' evidence package and opened an international investigation into CU7's known financial links, including old payments to shell accounts in Belize, the Dominican Republic, and the Seychelles. At least 3 names surfaced individuals with medical backgrounds, all of whom had relocated to non-extradition countries in the late 1980s. But in Florida, the focus turned local. Bailey paid another visit to David Lance, Andrea's former partner. This time, Lance met him at the door before he could knock. "I heard," he said. Bailey nodded. "She's home now." They sat in the same living room as before. This time, Lance had something to say. "There's something I never told you," he began. "Not because I didn't want to, because I didn't want to believe it was real." Bailey waited. That night, after I called in the report, I didn't stay at the trailer. I drove. Lance looked away. About a mile down the road, I saw headlights cutting through the woods. Not from a car, from an ambulance. Our ambulance. It passed me. Fast. I thought it was Andrea. I thought she'd driven off, but I never saw the driver. Bailey leaned in. "You think someone took it?" "I think it was already planned. The trailer, the call, everything. I think they used me as cover. I sat there, waiting for help, while they were already dumping her body and sinking the rig." Bailey didn't blame him. Not anymore. The operation had been designed for silence, for speed, for plausible deniability, and it had worked for 20 years. Back at the station, Reyes compiled their findings into a case summary for the state prosecutor's office. Charges were expanding. What had started as a homicide case now included conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, medical fraud, illegal human experimentation, pending federal ruling, interstate racketeering activity. But they still had one major problem. Rourke wasn't talking. He'd retained legal counsel, a high-powered firm out of Miami. His official statement claimed no knowledge of Andrea's death. He admitted to regrettable lapses in oversight at Clearwater Surgical, but denied any criminal activity. He said he didn't dispatch the call. He said he didn't order the body moved. He said he'd never heard of Caduceus Unit 7. Standard, deniability, smooth, legal, but they weren't relying on his word anymore because one more piece of evidence had just surfaced, and it was about to tear the lie wide open. It came from a place no one expected, the County Evidence Archive, a storage facility rarely used, where inactive case material sat in temperature-controlled boxes for decades. A junior analyst from the Attorney General's office, assigned to review unrelated 1980s fraud cases, stumbled across a reel-to-reel tape labeled Wills, EMS, Dispatch Archive, 06 Xerox 383rds. Copy number 2. A second copy, one that had never been logged, never signed out, never destroyed, and it was still intact. By the next morning, Bailey and Reyes were sitting in a secured audio lab with 2 technicians. The reel was carefully threaded through an original TEAC deck. Headphones distributed, the playback began. Scratch, hiss, thin voices, dispatch, static, routine chatter. Then, at 2:15 a.m., a new line opened. A voicemail, calm, slow. This is Dr. Rourke. We've got a transport need. 1 male, nonverbal, lot 17, code 6 internal, no return expected, quiet route. A pause. Copy, Dr. Rourke, replied dispatch. Logged as emergency. Sending unit 4. Bailey's jaw locked. The operator's voice, calm, trained, indicated this wasn't the first time they'd processed one of these. No alarm, no verification, just execution. The call continued. Background rustling, then silence. At 2:34 a.m., another voice cracked through, a woman. Andrea, Unit 4 on scene, patient not visible, location unsecured, there's now wait, who are you? A crash, a sharp breath, then static, then nothing. The room fell silent as the reel spun to its end. No one spoke for several seconds. Bailey broke the silence. That's premeditated murder. Reyes nodded slowly, and dispatch helped stage it. The voice on the tape, clearly Rourke's, matched to interviews, confirmed by voice analysis. He hadn't just known, he'd initiated it, ordered it, spoken it into motion. There would be no more denials. They submitted the recording to the state attorney's office the same afternoon. By nightfall, charges were amended to include first-degree murder. The next day, Bailey walked into the county jail for a direct meeting with Rourke. He sat down across from him in the interview room and slid over a cassette player. No threats, no monologue, just the push of a button. Rourke's voice filled the space. Calm, professional, clinical. This is Dr. Rourke, lot 17. No return expected. Rourke didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "You found the backup." Bailey stared at him. "Who else was in it with you?" Silence. "Who funded it?" "Nothing." "How many others died?" A pause. Then, calmly, "You don't want that answer, Lieutenant. Because once you get it, you'll have to admit how many knew. How many signed the checks? How many still wear badges, or robes, or stethoscopes?" Bailey sat in the silence that followed. He'd heard enough. He stood, collected the tape, and left the room. Rourke didn't call after him. That night, Bailey wrote a memo to the DOJ task force. Subject: Operation CU7. Priority: critical, active threat may still exist. Andrea Wills had finally spoken through tape, through blood, through every shred of truth they'd uncovered. But the voice they'd uncovered wasn't just hers. It was a system, and it was far from dead. With the tape now public record and the charges against Miles Rourke upgraded to first-degree murder, media attention exploded. Major outlets picked up the story. Paramedic murdered in 1983. Cold case blows open human trafficking ring. The swamp secret. Inside Florida's forgotten medical conspiracy. Caduceus, Unit 7, the ghost network. But Bailey didn't care about headlines. He cared about what came next. Because despite Rourke's arrest, and despite the evidence, he knew they were still missing the bigger piece, the people behind the curtain, the names that never appeared on clinic paperwork. The ones who bankrolled it all? That lead came once again through someone no one had followed up with in decades. Belinda Trask, a former Clearwater surgical logistics coordinator. She had left the clinic in 1983, just 3 months before Andrea vanished. At the time, she had refused to talk, claimed she knew nothing. Case files from then noted her as non-cooperative. But now, she was different. Reyes tracked her down in Tallahassee. 63, retired, lived alone. And when they told her they'd recovered Andrea's body, something in her cracked open. She agreed to meet in person. They sat in her apartment's small kitchen, tea steeping, photos of grandchildren on the wall. A quiet life. I should have come forward back then, she said, but I was scared. I still am. Bailey listened carefully. Belinda pulled a small binder from her cabinet. I kept this, she said. I don't know why. Guilt, I guess. Inside, shipment logs. Not drugs, not equipment. Organs. Labeled with nothing but weight, type, and a 5-digit code. The initials CU7 appeared repeatedly. These weren't legal transfers, she said. They didn't go through any donor network. They were brought in, processed, flown out, almost always at night. No documentation beyond this. Bailey flipped through the pages, over 30 unique entries. And this was happening at Clearwater? Yes, through the back surgical unit. But it didn't stop there. She hesitated. One time, I saw a list, not a shipment log, something else. A target roster, medical profiles, ages, blood types, notes about compatibility. Bailey's stomach turned. You're saying they weren't just harvesting from the dead? Belinda nodded. Her voice cracked. They were selecting. Back at the station, Reyes ran the codes from Belinda's logs through archived federal customs scans, shipping manifests from 1,982 to 1,984. Several matches popped up. Private planes, small airfields, receivers located offshore in countries with no transplant regulations at the time. Caduceus Unit 7 wasn't a rogue clinic. It was a pipeline. A system designed to procure, process, and export human organs under the guise of private surgical transfers. And Andrea Wills, she had walked in on a system in motion. She hadn't been silenced by panic or chaos. She had been neutralized. The final entry in Belinda's binder caught Bailey's attention. A handwritten post-it, barely legible after 20 years. If anyone finds this, follow up on shipment number 22,894. That's when it changed. That's when they started using the trailers. He flipped back. Shipment 22,894. No listed contents, no weight, no recipient, but the destination? Parcel 28C. The same land where Andrea's body had been found. They'd been burying more than just people. They'd been storing, disposing, operating. And now that dirt was giving up its secrets. 2 days after receiving Belinda Trask's binder, the team launched a full forensic excavation of Parcel 28C, the same remote stretch of land where Andrea's body had been found. But this time, they weren't just searching for one grave. They were searching for evidence of a system. The FBI, the State Medical Examiner's Office, and a forensic anthropology team from the University of Florida arrived with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. It took less than 6 hours to locate the second hit. By sunset, they'd found 4 more. Unmarked graves, all dated within the window of 1,982, 1,984. Each one shallow, rushed, poorly concealed. Within 48 hours, the count had reached 9 individual burial sites, each containing partial human remains, some dismembered, some missing vital organs. One had surgical gauze packed into the ribcage. Another had spinal vertebrae cleanly severed at the base as if prepped for extraction. And all were found within a 200-yard radius of where Andrea had been buried. Parcel 28C had been a dump site. Bailey stood at the edge of the excavation perimeter, silent. Even the forensic crews worked without speaking. The weight of it, this place really wassettled over them like humidity. Later that evening, Reyes reviewed the victim profiles. Of the 9 sets of remains recovered, 5 were female, estimated ages between 18 and 30. 3 were male, estimated 20s. 1 was a juvenile, approx. 15 years old. None had matching dental records in the National Missing Persons Database. No IDs, no names, no voices left behind. Just surgical trauma, medical tape, and the quiet horror of a system that had erased them. Meanwhile, the DOJ's offshore task force sent back confirmation from the Dominican Republic. Caduceus Unit 7 had indeed relocated operations to a private compound outside San Pedro de Macorís in early 1985. The land was registered to a holding company called MedCross International, now dissolved. Several former Clearwater-affiliated medical staff were linked to early board filings, including one name they hadn't seen until now: Gideon Trelane, the man who'd signed the 1,984 letter declaring CU-7's withdrawal from U.S. soil. According to customs and immigration logs, Trelane hadn't entered the U.S. since 1992. Current location unknown. No extradition treaties on file. But he wasn't hiding just untouchable. Bailey stared at the caseboard. Names, dates, graves. He added 9 new red pins to the map surrounding parcel 28C. Each one marked a set of bones that no one had searched for. Until now. That night, he returned to Catherine Wills' house with Reyes. They sat in her living room, surrounded by photos of Andrea as a child, in uniform, smiling beside an ambulance she used to call the dinosaur. Bailey placed a copy of the official report in her hands. We recovered more victims. Catherine closed her eyes, holding the report like a weight. She wasn't the only one, she whispered. No, Reyes said, but she's the one who wouldn't look away. Bailey nodded. And because of her, they're not buried in silence anymore. They left the house in silence. Behind them, a mother lit a candle in her daughter's name and in the names of 9 others the world had never heard of. Until now. By late August, the investigation had expanded beyond anything the Wellspring Sheriff's Department had ever seen. The DOJ formally designated it Operation Wills, named after Andrea, a rare move to honor a fallen first responder whose death had exposed a multinational, decades-long criminal enterprise. The press fixated on 3 things: the scale of the body count, the medical corruption behind Caduceus Unit 7, and the systematic failure of local institutions to act for over 20 years. But within the investigation team, one focus remained: shutting down every surviving connection to the pipeline. That's when Reyes received a call from Interpol liaison Javier Munoz, working the international leg of the case. He'd been following the shell companies tied to CU-7 and found one that was still active. Regenera Care, a wellness foundation operating out of San Pedro de Macorís, publicly registered as a fertility clinic. Privately, something else. Bank records showed it was accepting private donor packages, six-figure sums from unnamed patients with zero traceable medical outcome records. The name listed on the founding charter, Gideon Tree Lane. Same signature as the 1,984 withdrawal letter. Same network, same silent trail of vanished accountability. Bailey knew they couldn't reach Trelane directly, not yet. The Dominican Republic wasn't hostile, but it was slow, diplomatic. And Trelane had lawyers. But that didn't mean they couldn't make a move. He met with a federal prosecutor that afternoon and handed over all documentation. "We can't touch him internationally yet," Bailey said, "but we can cut off every funnel still active on US soil." The prosecutor agreed. By week's end, a coordinated sweep was launched. 4 medical supply companies in Florida and Texas raided 2 former Clearwater board members indicted for financial conspiracy. 3 private hospitals in Miami served subpoenas over anonymous transplant funding. And 1 former state senator, W. Hollings, under investigation for ethics violations and obstruction dating back to 1984. The system wasn't just breaking, it was collapsing, and then unexpectedly, they got a break from inside the wire. Rourke spoke. Through his attorney, he offered a limited proffer, a legal statement that wouldn't be used directly against him, but would expose information in exchange for consideration at sentencing. It was 6 pages long, typed, clinical, void of remorse, but it confirmed everything. Andrea Wills intercepted a Unit 7 transfer. She was not the intended responder. Her removal was authorized internally by clinic executive staff, with direction to silence all reporting parties. Her burial followed standard disposal protocol in use during 1983-84. Personnel involved included 2 EMS supervisors, 1 law enforcement official, and a contracted surgical team operating under MedCross International. As of 1985, CU-7 ceased operating in the US and transitioned to international service. No further activity occurred domestically under my direct knowledge. At the bottom, 1 sentence stood alone. I did not kill her with my hands. Bailey threw the statement on the table. He didn't need Rourke's hands. He had his voice, his plan, his name on the dispatch tape, his orders that sent Andrea to a false call, and now his written admission that she was removed under direction. He called Catherine Wills that evening, told her they'd received a statement, told her Andrea's death was no longer a mystery, told her they now had the chain of command. She didn't cry. She only asked one question. Will they go to prison? Bailey paused and answered with absolute certainty. Some of them already have. The rest were not done yet. The fallout was swift. Within 72 hours of Rourke's written proffer, 3 more arrests were made. Thomas Elroy, former Clearwater surgical administrator, arrested in Broward County while boarding a yacht registered to a shell company in Panama. Captain Dennis Holbrook, retired Wellspring Sheriff's deputy, arrested at his home. His signature had appeared on 2 falsified search logs from 1983, showing land near parcel 28C marked as cleared, despite never being searched. Dr. Evelyn Maris, former transplant coordinator at a Miami hospital, charged with laundering medical payments through MedCross International. But the most significant development came from Reyes' team in Tallahassee. Using records recovered from Belinda Trask and cross-referenced with archived financial disclosures, they discovered that state funding had been quietly diverted through the Florida Department of Public Health to cover rural emergency response expansion grants during 1982-1984. The listed recipient? East Palms Medical Response, meaning the state had subsidized a fake EMS network that was functioning as a front for illegal patient acquisition. And at the top of the approval chain, Senator W. Hollings. On the 29th of August, 2003, Hollings was subpoenaed to testify before a closed-door ethics panel. He appeared with 4 attorneys and answered every question with practiced denials. I do not recall, to the best of my knowledge. Those budget approvals passed through standard review. I was not directly involved in clinic oversight. But then they showed him the signature. On a direct letter of recommendation for Miles Rourke to receive immunity from state board investigation in 1984. His face shifted. No more answers after that. Just silence. The final blow came later that week, a tip delivered anonymously to Reyes in an unmarked envelope. Inside, a flight manifest from 1983, a private plane departing Clearwater Executive Airstrip. On board, Miles Rourke, Gideon Trelane, an unknown passenger listed only as M. Wills. The timestamp, the 3rd of June, 1983, 4:56 a.m., exactly 2 hours after Andrea's last recorded radio transmission. Bailey read the document in stunned silence. For 2 decades, they'd believed Andrea died near that trailer. Near the swamp, near the blood-stained cabinet in her own ambulance. But this paper suggested a darker truth. She may not have died immediately. She may have been taken, transported, held, and killed elsewhere as part of the same processing system she tried to expose. Bailey stared at her name, M. Wills. A clerical error? Or deliberate obfuscation? He didn't know, but it raised the possibility he hadn't let himself consider in years. That for a brief window, she had still been alive. He took the document to Catherine Wills that evening. She read it without blinking, then slowly folded the page and placed it on the table. She was fighting, wasn't she? Bailey nodded. Until the end. Catherine's hands trembled, but her voice was steady. Then I'll keep fighting too. In the morning, she filed a formal civil suit against the state of Florida, the Department of Health, Clearwater Surgical, and all known connected parties. For negligence, for conspiracy, and for the wrongful death of her daughter. It wouldn't bring Andrea back, but it would make sure they never forgot her name. The 2nd of September, 2003. Exactly 20 years and 3 months since Andrea Wills vanished on a routine EMS call. The day began quietly in Wellspring. The streets were wet from early rain. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Inside, rows of chairs filled with federal agents, local officers, medical officials, and the families of victims who had, until now, never even known there had been a case. At 9 a.m. sharp, the Attorney General stepped to the podium. Operation Wills was now officially unsealed. The statement was brief, but historic. We have confirmed the existence of a decades-long criminal network operating under the guise of rural emergency care, aided by private medical entities and corrupt public officials. The murder of paramedic Andrea Wills and the burial of at least 9 others is the direct result of that system. Further arrests are anticipated. We are not finished. Bailey stood at the back of the room, beside Reyes. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Later that day, a memorial was held for Andrea. Not a press event, not a political stunt. Just a simple gathering at the Wellspring Civic Center. Catherine Wills sat in the front row, clutching the same photo she'd kept on her mantle for 2 decades, Andrea in uniform, smiling, unaware of what was coming. Bailey gave a short speech. She could have ignored what she saw. She could have looked away, but she didn't. And because she stood up, because she refused to let them get away with it, the truth came out, not just for her, for all of them. He looked toward the 9 chairs behind him, each holding a single rose for the unnamed victims. This wasn't just a case. This was a system. And Andrea cracked it open with nothing but courage. Catherine approached the podium after him. She didn't read from a paper. She just spoke. I don't want the world to remember how she died. I want them to remember why. Because she believed that doing the right thing mattered, even when it cost her everything. That evening, Bailey returned to the parcel where it all began. Parcel 28C, now taped off, marked as a federal site, guarded 24/7. But he didn't go to investigate. He just stood at the edge of the clearing and watched the sun dip behind the trees. This was where they tried to bury her. But they failed. Because in the end, Andrea didn't stay buried. The storm had brought her back. The truth had brought her home. And now, her voice, her story, would never be silent again. Andrea Wills was buried with full honors. Her case, once ignored, dismissed, forgotten, had taken down a criminal network that operated in silence for decades. 9 other victims were recovered because of her. Dozens of arrests, multiple federal investigations, and a name the world would no longer forget. Her story didn't end in the swamp. It ended in justice. If you made it this far, remember her name. Andrea Wills wasn't just a paramedic. She was the one who answered the call, even when it cost her everything. And if her story disturbed you, good, because it should. Now ask yourself, how many others are still buried? How many voices were silenced? And how many more will it take before we start listening? Thanks for watching. This was Operation Wills. We'll see you in the next case.